Hello again, and welcome to Postscript. We're watching and listening to and discussing World on Fire Season 1. This is Episode 2 that myself and Matt Wilson will be talking about today. Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, I'm good, Fred. How are you?
I'm doing all right. Let's get right into it. We're in a war,
Yes.
right? And it's 1939, as established in the first episode of this series. And Harry arrives at his mother's house with Jan. And it probably went just about as you would expect it to go. Awkward and everything.
Yeah, I don't know what he was expecting from his mother. I'm sure he received exactly that, though. We learn a little bit more about her. She often confesses to having zero motherly instincts or skills, if that matter.
Yeah, she's very self-aware for being snobby. She knows that she's kind of a pain in the behind.
She takes Jan in with a little bit of curiosity, but not a lot of objection, and quickly sniffs out there's probably more to the story than Harry initially shares. She probes as why this particular boy is everybody bringing back orphans and refugees and
Why
such.
this one?
And Harry dodges a little bit, but in essence knows he's going to have to explain more or build more layers to this to get his mother off his back. But
and otherwise, Jan's in a foreign world, really. I mean, it's hard to understand at this point if he's ever been to England before in his life. Probably not. And he's in this stranger's house with essentially a stranger. I mean, I would think he knows of him.
Right. Yeah, I mean, trying to imagine a much older, a new brother-in-law, probably doesn't know him all that well, just sees him around the house a lot.
Probably missing mom and dad.
Suspect Jan knows little to maybe no English. Does correct, I think Lois pronounces his name as Jan at one point and corrects it to Jan, so he knew at least what she was trying to say when they're doing a crossword puzzle or a jigsaw puzzle together. Yeah.
And when you bring up Lois, just like Harry's mom, Lois sniffs out that obviously there's something else going on as well.
Yeah, the Lois and Harry theme throughout this show is amazing and difficult to watch play out. She doesn't quite buy it either, and there's one particular moment we learn a lot about Lois. She's very aware, very, very perceptive. As Harry is talking through the story of the family where Jan came from, he lists out everybody, and if you've seen the episode, you know what I'm talking about, skips over Cassia's name, and Lois notices.
Right, has a lot of detail otherwise.
Right.
It's like, how do you know this much about this particular family, and you ended up with this particular boy?
Right. Yeah, so she kind of figures out that there's a connection there, and that leads to some decisions on her part later in the episode, and sets up their relationship for a bit of a break.
Yeah, so we'll see where that goes. And just like in episode 1, there's this pinwheel that we spin around to different scenes, different locations, and focusing on different people. So it seems like Harry with Jan, I mean, there's a lot of time spent around that, but we quickly end up back in Berlin with Nancy, who's the American journalist. And again, we see her encounter with some censorship on what she's reporting on. But otherwise, we start to get to know her neighbors a little bit more, the Roslers, right? But there's a lot still to understand here.
Yeah, the progression, so to speak, in Berlin is all about the neighbors. We do see Nancy's themes continuing. She's kind of fighting the power there of censorship. But we meet more of the Rosler family. We meet the father this time. We get to know the wife and the daughter. Hunting for her name on my sheet here.
It's Hilda.
Hilda, thank you. Yep. And they invite Nancy out to see a movie at the local theater. And I love this part. We see newsreels in front of the movie. We saw this in episode 1 as well. I don't think I mentioned it, but fascinating bit of news dissemination. The head newspapers, of course, this was pre-television as we know it. So one way you would get your news is as a little newsreel before a movie. Pure German propaganda.
Sure.
Pure propaganda. It's the usual trope of invading army. Well, it was actually a counterattack because
Right.
Poland started it, and Poland was the aggressor, and we put that down, and now
put
we've
them into
invaded
place.
to reduce that risk. And it was all smoke and mirrors. But the movie is inconsequential. What we see though is that young Hilda has, I think, a seizure. It looks very much like a seizure in the theater. And the Roslers have a lot of concern about people like knowing or hearing. Like I didn't quite follow. Maybe this was seizures weren't as understood as they are today. I mean, this was takes place 80 or so years ago. But they have a lot of concern about anybody really being overly aware, being involved. They don't even necessarily want to get medical attention for her.
No. Nancy's recommendation.
Right.
What was interesting, I did observe when they first sat down in their seats at the theater, there was a woman in this row ahead that seemed to recognize them. But again, maybe that's something for later on.
Yeah, there's also the other neighbor that we meet, Frau Klopp. And I think Hilda kind of teased this up a little bit in that, this is a country at war, and there will always be suspicion of who supports what. So these are potential, as I think Hilda describes, gossips and informants. So,
and we didn't really know where Nancy was. I mean, we knew she was in Warsaw at one point, but like where she was staying, it seemed like we kind of assumed it was the United Kingdom's embassy. Right. But I don't know if this is like her apartment, a hotel, or like. I mean,
it feels like an apartment.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, she seems to be familiar with their neighbors by name, so it's probably not random hotel visitors. I'm guessing apartment, yeah. But yeah, that's her home base, and she will have her own fight there in Berlin. I feel like that was part of this overriding theme through the whole episode is everybody's going to war.
Yes, well, that's where we end up.
And I laughed at myself as I watched episode 2, because through episode 1, I wanted to be convinced this is sort of a love story. You got Harry, you got Lois, you got Cassia. All that was put to bed by the end of episode 2, where everybody's in uniform, everybody's going to fight their own version of this war.
Right.
And this is going to be a show all about the war. So I have to steel myself for that.
Right. You had Cassia basically pledging allegiance, so to speak, to join, I presume, some aspect of the army. Certainly, well, and Harry loses his role as a translator.
Gets fired.
And then so he enlists. It seemed like Lois's brother, Tom, initially was following in his father's footsteps as a pacifist, but then at some point decides to join the Navy.
Right.
And then, and I feel like this storyline still has more to develop. But when we're in Paris, the doctor, the English doctor there, like at his friends urging, like, you probably should get out of France. We're going to be going to war. And he's like, no, I'm here to stand with my friends.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought him up. We didn't talk about him a lot in episode 1. There's a lot to cover, but Dr. Webster O'Connor, our contact in Paris, and the 2 bandmates that he becomes friends with, Albert and Eddie. One of them, Eddie, bails. Yeah, he's like, I'm getting out of here. I know what's coming. There's nothing good to be had in Paris. But Webster and Albert stay, and they form that romantic connection. They are going to ride this out, it seems. And for Albert especially, there's a quote from Eddie, the other one, about this predicament, but they recognize being colored and queer with Nazis in charge. Good luck with those chances, is what Eddie says to him right before he leaves. So the war has not come to Paris yet as of episode 2, but this is setting up to be another front and another difficult situation. Yeah.
And individuals that probably would be a target
right.
of the Nazis. And I mean, as when we're in Poland for a few scenes, it seemed like any male was being rounded up.
Yeah, there's interesting aspect of watching Poland and a little bit in England. You see 2 countries at war, but very different implementations. In England, we see sandbags outside of Harry's office right before he gets fired.
Oh, yeah.
And as Lois's father is doing a bus run, you see kids with gas masks. They were all given gas masks to have. In Warsaw, it is pure occupation.
Yep.
So you have Nazi Germans outright sitting at the cafes, being served, I assume not paying. You have them misabusing Jewish gentlemen in the street, cutting their beards off, asking everybody, "Are you Jewish?" Starting fights. Cassia gets in a little bit of trouble, but holds her own in a way. We learn about her fighting spirit in a scene where she sticks up for one of her coworkers and gets beat up by one of the Nazis. But I think that just even further steels her to join the resistance later. But yeah, I mean, again, this is a war movie, and we see that that discrepancy of what it means. Even Lois sums it up well when Harry returns, and he says, everything has changed. And she goes, not much has changed here.
Yeah.
You mean you've changed in the 6 months or so that he was gone. And just such a dramatic change of life in Poland because of that invasion. It's the Warsaw scenes are tough, but it's nice to see Cassia and her brother Gregors have a brief reunion before she shoos him away because she recognizes the risk that if he gets seen, he will be executed right there. And then she meets in this episode, and again, we learn not only she's strong, but she's clever in a scene where she chases them away and then is followed or follows. I forget how this works out, but she meets a member of the Polish resistance, and we get his name a little bit. But as the Germans follow them to Kassia's apartment, she quickly has him change his clothes, makes up a name of Jan for him, calls him his brother or her brother, just immediately forms a plan to try to hide this man in their house and act like they were just sitting there all day instead of being out in the street. So she's quick on her feet, she's smart, she's tough. That is the scene where her mother dies, or I shouldn't use the passive voice, is killed by the Nazis for...
Point blank.
Oh, yeah, point blank. For being, I mean, she's almost catatonic in the show, but she knows what happens to her husband. She knows who did it. She has no love or respect for the Nazis, and she walks herself into being killed by them in that scene. But all of these things happen, I think, to really cement the change in Cassia. I mean, she has to have very little else to live for order to join the resistance. And if this is the path the writers want her to go on, it makes sense. All these things are really forming and allowing us to see how she reacts to these difficult situations. And she turns into a fighter. Different than where I thought her storyline would go in episode 1. I wasn't quite sure. But again, this is a war show, and it makes sense for her to join in her own way, just like all the other characters that we meet.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's setting it up to be one of the stronger female characters in the series. So I'm interested to see how that progresses heading into 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7.
Yeah. And again, I'm coming in clean. I have no idea. So this is not subtle spoilers or anything. We're just kind of learning as we go.
Speculation, completely.
We get to know Tom a little bit better, too. He has a few layers. Again, self-awareness is kind of a theme. We see that with both Tom and Harry's mom. Tom talks a lot about his fondness for his sister and recognizes she's kind of the rock keeping things together. He said, "It's certainly not me."
Yeah. I like that scene between the two siblings. That it definitely seemed like he had a fondness for his sister in a not in a weird way. No, just
respect.
But just respect and a certain level of kind of protection. He wants what's best for her. He recognizes maybe he's made some poor choices and whatever. Right. As has been established in the first episode, a couple of run-ins with the law and whatnot. But I mean, he and they both seem to respect their father. I really like the relationship that we see with their father and the two children. I mean, they both are in different paths for different things, but there's definitely a mutual respect among the three of them.
Yeah, I think so too. Seeing that family come together, especially as the two children head off into their own versions of war. I like that they're giving us reasons to care a little bit more about Tom. You see a little more depth to him, a little bit of self-realization. This is someone that I'll be curious to watch how his experience in the Navy continues to shape him and what he might have to deal with there. One of the unsolved mysteries continues to be Harry's father.
Oh, yeah.
And there are signs in this episode that it might have been death by suicide.
She mentioned while he was shaving, right?
Yeah,
This is
what a weird
the
line.
razor your father used.
It's the blade your father used, by the way, something like that.
Yeah.
So without spelling it out, it does seem like maybe suicide, but still not a lot of information about that. Obviously, it might have been tough to live with.
Right.
The wife in that scenario, she seems a cold kind of woman, but maybe that was partially because of what happened. We don't know the sequence. We don't know what that was like. Hopefully learn more about that as we go with Harry. What an odd decision of Harry. It actually makes a little more sense now I think. Harry buys Jan a bird, in essence a parakeet. He says he bought it at a pub to leave with him. But if you remember the family photo that Cassia keeps seeing, they had one back in Warsaw. So I think it was a replacement bird. And thinking about that now, it makes a little bit more sense.
Something a little bit familiar, something like from home. Which, that family photo, which he at one point looks at, perhaps right before he buys the bird, it just seems like forever ago now. Think of how the whole family was together and how, unfortunately, it's been torn apart. Yeah,
I think about a matter of a month or so. And there is a time skip toward the end of the episode. We see Lois out with the ENSA, I believe. So I had to Google this. Entertainment's National Service Association was founded in 1939. So
it's like the equivalent of the USO?
Yeah, it's very parallel to our USO, yeah. So Lois would have been one of the original members, perhaps, and her partner, Connie, who we get to know a little bit better in this episode. We see Harry an officer in the British Army, going to be perhaps some degree of translator and officer, of course. Tom in the Navy, and then Cassia being sworn into the Polish resistance. So 4 folks going very different paths into this war, not to mention what's going to happen in Paris, perhaps. Lots of roads to walk down with the future episodes.
Yeah, this episode really just unlocked the door to so many more questions. Yeah. There was a lot established in the first episode, and I feel like we're still doing a lot of establishing.
Yeah, a setup episode, definitely. This allows us to get to know the characters. Again, I do feel invested in all of them. A few mysteries left, but 4 people that we're starting to care about also continuing further or for some back into very dangerous situations. And it's a good show.
It is. We're hooked so far. We hope you are too. And we certainly welcome your comments and feedback.
Always lots of ways you can do that. Find us through email, might be an easy one, postscript at WITF.org or just PS at WITF.org. We'll take questions, take comments, corrections. If you're a history buff and there's stuff we're missing, please share. We are not history experts. Learning a lot by watching this show, but obviously there's more nuance and timeline to be had. Neville Chamberlain gets a reference again in this episode. We know his time is short, but we don't know how that'll play out in connection to the show. Social media, all of the WTF socials, we'll keep an eye on those. Also through this podcast itself, anywhere podcasts can be found, or on YouTube, on the WITF Mosaic channel, you will find these episodes. We would love to have likes and comments there as well. We'll comment back and answer questions there happily too. I want to give 2 shout-outs today, Ali Amaros on tech and production, and Helen Widdowson. If you're watching this, Helen did the set design, does set designs for most of our shows. Check this out on YouTube. If you're having fun, if you want to help us make more content like this, please visit WITF.org/mosaic. You'll see information there about all of the content we produce and some information about how you can be a supporter of this show and other productions from WITF.
Thanks so much for listening to and watching Postscript. We'll talk again soon.
See ya.